Welcome to all of you. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Swiss time, but some of you are from the US and it's early morning for you, Ginny, and some are from Asia and it's evening there. You, David, are from the UK and it's 2 o'clock for you. And my two colleagues from IMD, it's 3 o'clock. So welcome all of you, wherever, whatever the time is for each of you. I'd just like to make one small comment regarding the relationship between IMD and the L'Orange network before we go further. We have now, as you may know, we have now, I have sold the L'Orange network to IMD, and we are now in the middle of integrating the L'Orange network with what IMD is doing. So this is the first of 4 webinars we are doing together. There are 3 other webinars scheduled, joint webinars, one on March 31st on cryptocurrencies, and one on April 25th on leadership roles in shaping the future, with particular interest, featuring women leaders. And the third one on May 26th on Gigacom companies and investments. So I'm looking forward to an exciting set of webinars done jointly during this spring. But please be patient with us. It will take some time to iron out everything when it comes to the databases and merging the various files and all of that. But we are doing good progress. Let me now take 2 minutes to introduce each of you, and I will start with you, Ginny, since you are the only female participant in the panel, which is a great honor, by the way. And you just shook your hands so everybody knows who you are, and that's good. Thank you. Ginny is a faculty member at Darden at the University of Virginia. And we just discussed that a little bit time ago. It's kind of in a remote place in Virginia, about 2 hours straight south from the Washington International Airport. And she is on the faculty there, obviously, and has been the associate dean for the MBA program. And before that, she was a chief learning officer at the United Technologies. So she has a good handle on what we're going to discuss today, based on the realities, both as they are found in business, as well as in academia. And many of you may have seen that great article she wrote in Harvard Business Review recently. And she also is working on a book on that. She has written many books, by the way, and it all has to do with design-led innovations, particularly when it comes to the social sector and government. So I said to you, Gina, that I wouldn't say more about you than this. I hope this is okay.
Perfect.
Okay, then it's you, David. David Kester here. Thank you for showing your hand there. David is the managing director of Kester and Associates, which is a strategic design consulting firm based in London. And he is also in charge and a coach of the Design Thinkers Academy in London, which I don't know much about it, David, but I presume that is a forum for people to get together with different backgrounds to should we say, sort things out in practice.
And learn.
Exactly. And it's very interesting. David has also been involved in several institutions and associations throughout his career. And he is involved on the board of several companies. And I think that adds to this a good practical understanding of design. Let me now move to my two colleagues at IMD. Both of you, by the way, came to IMD after I left, so maybe it's wrong to call you colleagues, but I'm still saying that. And let me start with you, Didier, because I'm going by the alphabet here. Thank you for raising your hand. Didier is a professor of strategy and digital transformation, important. And he's, of course, doing teaching and research in those areas, particularly as it relates to digital economics, digital strategy, and large-scale digital transformation. Again, very central relative to what we're going to discuss today also. And rather than rattling down all the books and articles you have been involved with, Didier, I will simply say you are the author or co-author of several books and articles. I hope that's okay. Thank you. And then to you, Patrick Reinmiller. He's also a professor of strategy and innovation at IMD. And the interesting thing is that he has studied both in Germany, Holland, England, Italy, and Japan. And I find that quite amazing that you have all of that kind of global reach in what you're doing. And I said studied, but I would say studied and taught, I should have said, because it's a mix of that, which is rather unique and great for when it comes to design thinking, that this is a global issue, not a US issue or a UK issue or a Swiss issue. And interesting, I found also interesting, Patrick, that you are an angel investor in a startup and non-executive director there. So again, a good practical blend when it comes to all of it. Again, rather than rattling down everything you've written and all of that, I simply will say you have written many articles and very interesting, reviewed. You're on the review board when it comes to many journals, which is a great thing. Thank you for doing that. So that's all I want to say, if it's okay with the four of you. And I'm now asking you, Ginny, if you could start it off.
Great. Thank you, Peter. I'm delighted to be here and have the opportunity to give a quick overview of design thinking and why I think it's important for organizations in every sector. I will say I am an unlikely evangelist for design thinking. I trained as an accountant. I spent years as a BCG consultant before becoming an academic researcher. So I'm a numbers analysis kind of person. I only stumbled into design thinking in my search for toolkits to help managers find organic growth opportunities. But what I've discovered is a way of working with, I think, really transformational potential. It's not very often that we get to uncover in organizations a new way of working that has the potential to really create dramatic improvements in the business outcomes we produce. The quality movement, for instance, clearly did that for manufacturing. It took an abstract concept, quality, and it allowed organizations to operationalize it in practice in ways that shifted day-to-day behaviors and outcomes. Well, after 10 years looking at design thinking in practice in organizations, I've come to believe that design thinking can do for innovation what total quality management and Six Sigma and Lean have done for quality. It can help to unleash people's creative energy. It can build engagement, help them better work together and manage risk in a changing world. And finally, I think it can radically improve business processes, specifically around producing organic growth. Now, how does it do that? Well, I'd argue it does it the same way that TQM did it for quality, by providing a highly structured, scalable, and teachable set of tools and methods. These include what I think are underutilized research methodologies like ethnography today. It includes new conversational approaches that are dialogue rather than debate-based, so they help us bring divergent stakeholder groups into the conversation to look for solutions. And it also finally offers new experimental approaches that better equip managers to actually manage risk rather than avoid it, which is what we've largely been taught to do in organizations.
Yes.
Why do I think that highly of design thinking? Well, in businesses, we have many, many toolkits. Why do we need another one? Is the question I get. Well, I think we need design thinking because it's quite different. It's a methodology that is optimized to work under conditions of uncertainty, whereas most of the tools we use assume predictability and control. There's three qualities of design thinking that I'll just review quickly that I think confer that great ability under uncertainty. First of all, it begins with the customer and their job to be done. Unlike most customer-centric approaches that we talk about in organizations today, design thinking is not about knowing the customer well enough to sell them what your organization produces. Instead, it's about uncovering deep, unmet, even unarticulated needs. This allows the identification of truly differentiated products and services, which we know are the core for profitable organic growth. Design thinking is also possibility driven. So often in business, as we look to the future, we start by accepting the constraints we work with today. Instead, design thinking begins by standing in the future and asking the question, what if anything were possible? Beginning with possibilities rather than constraints is the surest route to creating something new for tomorrow that looks like more than just a tweak on today. Now, of course, we know that everything is not possible, and some of those constraints are real, and we'll have to change our idea to adapt to them. But motivating the creativity to end-run constraints is just as important as the creativity that comes up with the idea itself, because the excitement of possibilities is what drives human motivation and caring to create a different kind of outcome. Finally, the third quality that I want to mention is that design thinking is iterative. It doesn't ever expect us to get the solution right on the first try. It treats any idea like a hypothesis, and then it designs experiments to test it. Experimentation, in my opinion, having worked with a lot of very smart MBAs and managers, is a critical weakness in both business school curriculums and in business practice. As managers, and I can testify to this from my finance and accounting background, we're taught to take the numbers we've got and work backwards to try and use them to answer the questions that are important. Hypothesis-driven thinking instead asks us to think about the data we need and then go out and construct data sets to create that. That switch in reasoning from traditional analytic thinking to experimentally hypothesis-based thinking is extraordinarily difficult to teach. It's what I try and teach our students who become strategy consultants. And the structure of design thinking and the tools it offers really help tremendously in helping students make that transition. So for all the reasons I've talked about, I think of design thinking as offering a new kind of social technology. And I use the word technology here very carefully. Today, when we hear the word technology, we tend to think of manufacturing technology, or even more prevalent these days, the kind of digital technology that we'll talk about later in this session. And certainly the advances in digital technology over the last 10 to 20 years have been extraordinary. I mean, we carry around now with us in our pockets the computing capacity that relatively recently would have taken large buildings with many stories that took up a city block, right? But reaping the benefits of that new digital innovation often requires that human beings think and act in new ways. If we ask the question, how are we doing in the human dimension? I think the evidence is that we are not doing very well. Data is mounting that social media, for instance, rather than helping us work together and find better solutions, is pushing us further apart. It's aggravating our differences, and it's narrowing our field of vision in the data we work with. So for me, design thinking offers a very special and unique kind of social technology. It helps us to have different kinds of strategic conversations. And for me, strategic conversation is the cornerstone of successfully navigating the kind of world we live in now. It helps us create conversations that are capable of leveraging difference to find higher order and better solutions. And that will help us get to what strategic success we know is really all about: better value creation for customers, higher engagement on the part of employees, and better risk management in a changing world. So let me leave you with that as a fast introduction to my thinking on design thinking, and I look forward to hearing from our other panelists.
Thank you very much, Jeannie. I mean, this is very impressive, very clear what you're saying. And I don't want to kind of put labels on what you said, but it struck me that it's very optimistic what you're talking about, very future-oriented, good eclecticism. And I like that, I have to say. So thank you, Jeannie. I'm asking you now, David, if you could pick it up from there and share with us your perspective.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter, and thank you, Jean, for also giving the context on design thinking. I'm going to share some slides because I'm the case study guy. So I'm just going to share my screen now. And picking up on what you were saying, Peter, I've called this optimistic futures because really that is the essence of design. How we cast forward, we look to making things better. And in this talk, I'm looking at how we use design thinking to redesign systems. And also this is an illustration of where design thinking's helped connect digital transformation and the circular economy. And of course, what I'd like to tell you is 5 easy design thinking steps to transformation. You know, we take a big knotty problem. In this case, I'm going to talk about single-use plastics and work through to the adoption of a new breakthrough SAP technology platform. That's what I'd like to tell you. What I actually will tell you is that it isn't actually, I haven't got 5 easy steps, I've got 4 messy steps. We did have a big knotty problem. I have to tell you, there's a lot of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And we'll pick up on what Jean was saying about experiments, because there were lots of experiments and not all of them worked. And there's plenty of things lying on the cutting room floor. So I hope to give you a quick and unvarnished talk here through this project. So it started in 2018 with a very clear focus for innovation, a meeting with Stephen Jameson, who you'll meet later. He's going to come and join us. And at the time, he was leading AI and machine learning at SAP in the UK and Europe. And together, we honed a very clear question. How can we harness the appetite among UK citizen consumers? Because there was there's a huge appetite out there for change around plastic waste and pollution. But specifically, we were looking here at digital technologies, supply chains, and really having an impact on single-use plastics. But Stephen actually came with just to draw back, a hypothesis on the role of business and technology. Because he was saying, look, SAP, 77% of the world's transaction data touches one of our databases. What if we started with us as a purpose-driven business? We engaged with our customers on their concerns, the things that matter to them, like sustainability. And from there, we deliver our innovation and our technology to the market. So absolutely rooted in what the concerns of customers are. So SAP joined our researchers to go out and really understand what are the real struggles of consumers. And we set up a plastics lab, and we recruited 24 consumer citizens representing a very broad demographic mix. And we also armed them with the technology so they could tell us what was actually happening in their lives minute by minute, second by second, and we could process that looking at the issues around plastics. And we did home visits as well. I'll just show you a little bit, just to give you a flavor. Jean mentioned ethnography, just a little bit of a flavor of what we were doing there.
We have first invited people to come to us. So what we do with ethnographic research is really collecting stories from people. And in those stories, we really focus on what people actually do and why they do those things. We give them a digital diary, so it's an app on their phone, which they use to capture all kinds of experiences they have.
So they gave me this app to actually record how much plastic I'm wasting, or how much plastic there is in my day-to-day life. So I'm going to just take a picture and record it in the app to send it to the group. From my understanding, there is 7 different kind of recyclable plastic, but it goes up to 50. So therefore, it makes my task even more difficult to know, okay, can I recycle this or not? And if I can't understand it, it's very difficult for me to explain it to my kids to actually do the right thing.
So from doing that sort of ethnographic, very observational research, we were able to pull together different sorts of behavior types, personas that represent all sorts of different consumer behaviors. We were even able to look at what an adoption curve might look like for those different sorts of consumers. And on the back of the data that we then had, we pulled together 30 global clients to immerse them in the research and try to start building ideas with them and with the end consumers. So we put together sprint teams. You can see Guy, who was in that film there, with a design manager at Unilever, a packaging designer, an innovation consultant at SAP. And off the back of that, we could build project briefs. So basically building the starting point for a project off the back of the real pain points of the businesses and their consumers. And from that, we could then start to ideate and develop ideas, strategic ideas, quick wins. And with those quick wins, even in the moment, we were sketching those ideas out and testing them back with end users. We'll just give a little feel for what it's like to be in the room and picking up on that word that Jean said, the social technology aspect. So maybe just picking up on the spirit in the room.
It was enlightening. I mean, just having the opportunity to calibrate some of the perceptions that we'd gotten from the reading material that we'd had as a background on I think as a direct consequence of the conversation with Pallavi, the ideas just exploded out. So we need to narrow down a bit.
The groups have been in confusion and flux, and now they've come together and there's a consolidation of ideas, and they're beginning to sketch through them and think through how the user would respond to it. So it's a real progression.
Our idea is about creating a new app that will allow consumers to get information about how they can recycle their plastic waste, and also give them a voice to feedback to brands and retailers.
The idea is about a system whereby every packaging item on the market is being scanned and has information on what it's being used for.
They've seen what we have issued by way of rally cry here, and they've responded, and everyone's come here with the right spirit, which is really inspiring. I've genuinely in the workplace not seen a thing like this come together before.
So off the back of that, and that sort of energy and the creativity, ideas were developed, they were selected, and we went into proper development. So RecycleMate, using machine learning with GPS to help sort and recycle plastics on the go, actually using machine learning to even just identify in the individual plastics and where you can put it. Creating working prototypes that we could share with industry partners, we could try to build adoption around. And we brought together, with the help of clients like Unilever, we brought clients and the retailers together. But it has to be said, not all of those ideas took. And as I mentioned earlier, plenty of ideas on the cutting room floor, or ideas that moved off in very, very different directions. But one idea really took root. And this really put data and big data at the heart of how you connect the whole of the plastics life cycle, and indeed the life cycle of products, so the circular economy, together. And a system-wide approach evolved, looking at the whole notion of responsible design, consumer collaboration, packaging data, and particularly things like extended producer responsibility. So the idea really took root. We then moved into development of that project. And Stephen will tell us a little bit more if you want to ask him, because he's going to come and join the panel. But I've got here a little film from the launch last month, Jim Sullivan, Head of Product Management, just so you get a feel for actually what the final product is, because there we had a project, you've seen the sprint. Let's just get a quick sense of actually what came out of this. This is the product at work.
I'd now like to share a quick tour of SAP Responsible Design in production. We first land on the Extended Producer Responsibility Dashboard, EPR for short. You can see the reports on packaging fractions by materials, and also a review of data quality by material, data issues, and upcoming tasks. For packaging fractions, we can flip this to look at the percentage of packaging that is recyclable or renewable or other metrics. We can also look at data quality by different types of material. Next, let's have a quick look at our year-to-date EPR analysis. We see, for example, the EPR fees for the Netherlands and Germany in a report I've just run for 2022 year-to-date. The value of SAP Responsible Design in production is in pulling together information from packaging databases and production systems that may be in silos across many parts of the business, and seamlessly integrating this into one central packaging data foundation.
So, to recap, what's actually happened here? What were those 4 design thinking steps I mentioned at the beginning? We started with a very big challenge. It was focused, but it was broad. We went through a range of activities, but they were all, each of those were organized under a set of steps. So there was a discovery, those home visits, the user workshops, the autoethnography. We moved, then we sort of narrowed our focus towards project briefs and built ourselves a platform for innovation with those personas and journey maps. And then we opened up again with co-creation through that sprint, building ideas, working with end consumers. And then we were narrowing back down again, honing down our ideas, user testing them, building MVPs, evaluating those ideas, so then SAP could pick up on the best ones and move those forward. We co-created these solutions then, involving the supply chains, and very importantly, involving the customers. So to conclude, what did we get? We got speed and momentum. That was key. 6 months to working prototypes, 12 months to scalable concepts with funding. Impact, well, responsible design and production has been launched with clients like Unilever and many others on board, with the World Economic Forum, with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It's up, it's running. And of course, much added value, huge amount of SAP team engagement in the issue, real sense of a purpose-driven business, tremendous media value, a busy pipeline. So all round, it's been a successful project. The postscript I'd like to add is to the point that Jean mentioned about the social technology and how what we're doing here actually changes us. It's well written in her own book, Experiencing Design. Because Stephen actually started, and I think he's a great exemplar here, and you may want to ask him a question or two. He started this journey leading work in machine learning and AI. And through this journey, he is now the global head of circular economy solutions at SAP, driving this and a wide range of programs. So in my final minute, just to give you a quick definition then, what I would see has actually been really going on here. What we actually have is creativity, the generation of ideas, innovation, turning ideas into value around technology, and design acting as a sort of connector between the two. Design the verb, enabling us to develop our ideas and also shift them into innovation, turning our ideas into value around the needs of users. And that, I would suggest, as a definition, would be how I would see design thinking. It's that verb, it's that process that enables our ideas to thrive and enables us to turn them into the innovation, the value that we require around the needs of end customers.
Great, thank you very much, David. That's good. Back to this very optimistic future. You know, there is a guy who has donated quite a lot of money to IMD. He is the chairman of the board and owner of a big bulk carrier shipping company, and he has created a foundation to battle try to handle all of the plastic waste in the oceans. And as we all know, there's a huge area in the mid-Atlantic which is nothing but plastic waste. And he is actually saying we need more innovative should we say procedures for doing that. And these innovative procedures, he's saying, they have to build on should we say, the social thinking of us people, of us users. And I think that's what you're talking about, David, and it's very interesting. So what I like to do, if it's okay with you, David, is to ask you, Stephen Jameson, you're listening in, if you could make a quick comment on all of this. It has to be a relatively quick comment because we are running out of time. Are you there? No. He's not there. Okay, we will not get a comment from Stephen then, but we'll go directly to my colleagues from IMD. And let me start with you, Didier Bonnet, if you could make some comments on what we're talking about.
Yes, sure. And so I come from the world of digital transformation. So most of my clients and what I teach is around this field. And I really was totally taken by how Jeannie started her spiel, because she talked about two things that are really important. One is, how do we unleash creative energies facing problems that are really complex and uncertain? And the second one, which I love even more, when you said, people tend to accept the constraints. And I battle a lot with many of my clients to try to get them out of the beauty of technology and understanding what that actually does for our consumers, our organization, and so on and so forth. And it's kind of a really huge paradox because, we keep hearing that digital transformation failed, depending on who you listen to. It's 50% of the time, 87% of the time, whatever. And when you say why, no one mentions technology. It's all about people and users and adoption. And so I said, whoa, there's something's going wrong here. And I think if I can venture a couple of thoughts, I think, I tend to try to really push this notion of, think about technology as constraint busters. We've known for years that technology has reduced distances. Technology is allowing us to, communicate in very different ways. It's taken out borders to some extent. There's some downside to that, as Jean mentioned, but generally it's removed a lot of constraint. It's removed language constraints, right? We can use the phones that you were mentioning, Jeannie, to actually translate with people that don't speak the same language. So if we start thinking about this as constraint busters, then we can really start using technology as a creative tool. And this is really my belief, or at least where I've landed, is, particularly at the conception stage, when you're trying to crack complex problems, you really have to think about technology as real constraints busters, allowing you to do things differently. And I think it's a very big difference between success and failure. Very often I see people using technology to substitute things that they're already doing rather than transform, and using the power of technology to really completely rethink the solution. And this is why it may sound, sometimes when I say that, people say, well, technology can't be a creative tool. Actually, for me, it is absolutely. These digital technologies are just new creative tools that we have to use very often. And this is why I keep saying that I think design thinking and digital technology makes excellent bedfellows, because of this notion of not thinking about the beauty of technology and AI and blockchain and all these kind of things, but what do they actually do, and can we actually serve our customers or our users in very different ways? So I think that's the first point. The second point, which is more an area of interest to me, is that the ethnography part of design thinking is extremely important. So trying to understand human beings, and you can look at the last decade of digital transformation. We all know, for at least people who have looked in detail at this, that at the end of the day, human being still matters, right? Whether you're in B2C or B2B, there is a human being at the end of the chain that you need to understand how they behave, how they use your product and services, and so on and so forth. And I think we've got a new stream that's of extreme interest to me, and I don't have the answer, but I'll throw it on the table, which is, can we get to a real marriage of ethnography and behavioral science with the data side? People seem to be in two camps. You're either everything's got to be data driven because we've got these big data sets everywhere, or everything's got to be more people based and behavioral. And I think the answer is probably in between. We can get today, or at least certain companies I've seen can get to a pretty good understanding of what I would call digital empathy through data. Okay, because one of the problems with ethnographic studies, which we know for a long time, or personas or whatever tools we use, is that it doesn't scale really well, right? But today, some of the data we're getting from sensors like our mobile phones and others allows us to have a massive amount of contextual data. So contextual, we know where people are, we know what the weather is like in their geography, we can correlate all this data, and it gives that data real time at scale. So we can't, we're able, or potentially able, not to take a sample of our consumers and customers, but we can look at all of them. And I think if we start, and there's unfortunately too little research in the marriage of behavioral science and data to really try to understand, can we crack different problems, particularly at the customer experience end, through using sort of different tools and being able to really at the same time observe real human being, but also observe the data that help us to understand human beings better. So I'll shut it there and let Patrick pick up.
That was absolutely great.
Before you pick up, Patrick, let me just say one small thing. It's interesting to hear that you're saying it's a matter of technology and people, and all three of you so far have talked about the ethnology side, and all of you four are youngsters, and I'm a very old man, but I remember it very well that we were studying Sayert and Marx and Cohen and all of these people from Carnegie Tech that pioneered a behavioral theory of the firm. But at that time, there was no ability to scale up. And what you're saying, Didier, is now the technology can help us to do that. Yep. So what I'm kind of hoping as we sit here is maybe we are going to see a renaissance of a behavioral theory of the firm based on modern design realities and modern technology realities. But that's just a small point. Now it's you, Patrick. I'm sorry that I cut you off before you even got started.
No, it's just that so many wonderful things have already been said. There's hardly anything that I could add. I think I just like to underline that these two things need to come together. The data, the explicit knowledge, the tested knowledge, they just need to come together for innovation to flourish. And I think that's where I come from. And from a strategy perspective, I think to broaden the story a little bit further, if we're looking back, we still remember the moment when we ordered the video cassette to have a look at a process that was design thinking 25 years ago. So design thinking as the process is already quite old. It's just that pioneers such as Gene and David are pushing this further and further. I was especially glad that Gene pointed to the link to TQM, and so these social technologies and how we work together are extremely important in pushing organizations to transcend boundaries that we took for granted in the past. So what I really love about design thinking is that it allows also to revolutionize strategy. So many of us, Jim may remember, Jim van Hulst in the chat, when we thought about strategy in the past, it all started with thinking. And then it went into doing. And then it went into looking what came out. And I think the revolution that design thinking in these last decades has brought about is that in strategy, we are now enabled by the technology that Didier has pointed out as well, that we are now at a point where we don't start with thinking, but we may be able to start with observing and taking things in as they really are, whether this is through data capture or close observation. And then we start trying stuff out, not assuming that we hit the nail on its head and have the solution 100% right at the start, as in the old days, but we try things out to figure out what we can do better in the next iteration. And at the end, we then can reflect on the process and see how we can further improve the process the next time around. So from thinking, doing, and looking what we got, we went to observing, doing, and reflecting on the experience that we had together with the consumers, with the employees who get so much motivation out of this, and all of this enabled by technology. So I think for strategy, design thinking has really turned things around for the better, and I'm indebted to this. And I like that some themes are coming back. They seem to be parameters that are unchangeable, so ethnography and iteration. And so in the early 2000s at Philips, we were doing similar things. So these are the classics, but there are new things coming up all the while. So in the example that David showed, the phone capture of the evidence was a very handy way of digitalizing analog evidence. I like that a lot. One final comment. What I like about design thinking is that it looks at outliers as well. And so scaling this up massively through technology is great, but we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And very often that happens with the outliers. Close attention to a minority that is behaving differently today may actually be the key to looking into the future of us all tomorrow. So that's all I have to say. I thank the other panelists and also the commentators.
That's very powerful what you are saying here, Patrick. And I was struck by the fact that much of what you are saying seems to be very consistent with the 3 cycles that David offered as a way to, should you say, summarize what it all is. And I like the fact that innovation is very much part of the whole thing. It's not only people, it's not only technology, but it's all 3. And I like that. And I also like the fact that you say exactly the same as the other 3 speakers, that it's a lot of iterations, trial and error, experimenting, including understanding how to experiment so that the outliers are part of it, understanding that risk is there to be managed, not to be eliminated. I like that. So with that, let me thank you all for your comments. And I have prepared a few questions that I like to raise if you would be willing to address them. And the first question I'm going to ask you, Didier, to look at, but also you, Jeannie. And again, as a matter of courtesy, I'm going to ask you first, Jeannie, to comment on it, and then you, Didier, if that's okay.
The advantages of being a woman in your show.
We are all well behaved. That's also part of design thinking, you know. So basically, I'm asking myself. I was sitting here preparing for this meeting. You know, what is it? Why is it so difficult in practice to make these things happen? What are the real barriers, as you see, Jeannie, to this taking hold? You laid it out so beautifully, but what are those real challenges? And afterwards, I'm going to ask you for the same question, Didier, to comment what you see as a bottleneck.
Well, I think the challenges happen at different levels. And of course, some are much easier to tackle than others. There's a very basic skill deficit, I think. So we aren't very good, for instance, at doing hypothesis testing and experimentation. We don't teach it well. People don't do it. Organizations don't encourage it. Mm-hmm. We are also not very good at conversing across difference, which is inherently challenging. Managers find it a scary thing, and we just don't give them very good guidance about how to have these conversations that bring people with diverse perspectives into the room, acknowledge that diversity of opinion, and actually try and work with it in a constructive way to produce a higher order solution. So there's just some basic skill stuff. I think there's also some much harder to get at human nature issues. We all fear failure. And no matter how much we repeat that, fail fast to succeed sooner, none of us want to be the one who fails, right? And instead of interpreting it as learning, we call it failure. And then as human beings, we have an ego investment in our ideas. And so we find it hard to actually test these ideas and to let go of them. One of the things we joke about is the only thing harder to do than get something new started in most organizations is to kill something that's already going, right? So I think this is human nature. And then finally, I think our worship of efficiency in organizations is the final thing I would note. We have false notions of efficiency. We want to decide things quickly. We think that's the way to save time and money. Get it out in the market, right? What people call experiments are usually just pilots, right? They're not experiments in any sense of the word. We want to get it out there because that looks more efficient to us. Well, anyone, for instance, who studied strategic planning knows that it is a false illusion to define success as when you drop something in the market, because it may well fail. And so design thinking really asks for an upfront investment in understanding the problem. And in organizations, there's often just not support for slowing down in the beginning so that we can speed up in the end.
So what you're saying, Jeannie, is that what you're implying is that there's a huge challenge here when it comes to education. That, you said it in your opening statement too, that really the curriculum and the MBA program needs to address these issues you're talking about.
Exactly.
And if not, we will end up having, should we say, bottlenecks that are rooted in behavioral inadequacies forever, perhaps.
Yes.
Well, thank you. And what about you, Didier? What do you see as the real life bottlenecks here?
I do think so. I think what Jeannie said, what I totally agree 100%. I think there's also mindset issues in a lot of the teams I work with. And to some extent, this is why I'm such a great fanatic of diversity. And Gina, I'll take an example because I started my career as a strategy consultant as well. And I do remember how we used to recruit MBAs from about 5 schools worldwide, put them into a room and ask them to come up with something creative. And everyone had the same answer, right? So it was so this need and mindset to create this diversity that's going to start breaking down constraint, exploring new solution, creating some psychological safety, if you will, in terms of how far you stretch the boundaries of the possible. Are to me a real big barriers in a lot of organizations I work with. And it's really linked also to this notion of diversity. I think the notion of being able, very, very often people, and this is maybe education, we've trained people, as you say, Jeannie, from like accountants, right? There is a right answer, and here's a process by which you get to the right answer, right? And I think in the world we're in, certainly in my world, in digital, and we have to start thinking about options, So when we look at strategy, it's more about option theory and putting some chips on one side, more chips on the other. And this is where I think the testing is not just about, let's do a proof of concept and see whether we can scale it. It's more about, making sure we don't miss much and have this option thinking to actually be able to move at the right time. because as we know, things change, and today things change really quickly. So I would say those are the main one. And I really like what you said about the skill deficit, because we have to challenge ourselves, including us as business school professors, about, how do we reintroduce real critical thinking to our students? Real, how do you do? I mean, testing and experiments. I mean, it's, there's so many failures are happening today in the way that people do testing or experimentation, because they just haven't been trained. So I think there's a lot of that where we can help, to start maybe exploring options without having to make the final decision that everybody's pushing you for, because that's not really what strategy is about today. I mean, of course, you have to make decisions, but you also have to place bets that will de-risk, your medium to long-term future. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, it was a good answer. And again, a lot to pick up on that too. And let me just make one small comment. I mean, this whole issue of eclecticism and safe diversity, I think we saw that in some of the shots that you shared with us, David. And that seems to be fairly critical to make the creative dimension of design thinking a reality. And I think that was very heavily implied in what you said, David. Let me get to my second question. And now I'm going to ask you, David, to address that first. And then I'm going to ask you, Patrick. And it basically says, does design thinking come first? And then when that is done, we go to market with addressing the customer, and perhaps the way you kind of explained it with this kind of chart, that diversity narrow, and or do we mix thinking and design thinking and go to market? Not mix up, but mix. So if you could tell us what is kind of the sequence here, David, and then also afterwards you, Patrick.
So I think in the example that I gave, we were using design thinking very much at the front end of the innovation process. So there was really quite what you might see as a sort of foggy problem. And we were diving into insights and actually picking up on a point that I think it was Patrick was raising, which was we were actually bringing all sorts of data together. The ethnographic data gave us a particular angle because it allowed us to go deep into behaviors. But of course, we were also bringing quant data in from lots of different sources as well. But all of that was helping us open up a space and have a big discussion and get towards some very specific ideas. So yes, in that sense, in that particular example, it was really driving the front end of innovation. But to pick up on what Jean was saying, often when we're working on projects, we're using the design thinking process all the way through to not just the market, but also iteration within the market. So how do you design the experiment that you've got your initial idea? How can you, what does your MVP look like? And what sort of experiment are you really going to run? And then how are you going to test it? And then as your idea begins to grow, how you're scaling it. And you can use design thinking, of course, because why would you be able to use design thinking? Because fundamentally, and this is actually, I just really want to make this broader point, because design thinking isn't really that new. Design thinking is the application of design, but it's a sort of democratization of those processes. It's a building those processes into our daily way in which we develop products and bring them to market. And whereas there was a time when we used to go to people who would exclusively be called designers for their understanding of what's going on in the market and that sort of expert-driven view of the world, we have reached a point where actually you don't innovate as fast when you're working that way. And the wisdom that you get of many people working in diverse groups, as Jean and others have explained, that's where you get the speed, that's where you get the real creativity going, that's where you get the smart thinking, because you've got lots of different disciplines, lots of different viewpoints working together. So really what we've done with design thinking over, and let's face it, it sounds new, but really it's been going on for a long time. What you've got there is a process of embedding design into the way that we do things in our businesses. So I would suggest, yes, it works very well at the front end, but it absolutely, it's what, as you travels along the journey, you're working in with agile, lean, and other techniques. And that's what we're doing as we work with our clients as the products get to market. The development of the prototypes, the way that you're testing them, the way that you're going back to users and finding out how they're using them, so you can evolve your product.
So basically, what you're saying, David, is that this kind of multi-loop thinking that you are describing requires quite a lot of upfront thinking. It's not a matter of...
I think it's absolutely, and I think it's what will drive, it's what you can, particularly if you're looking for revolution and you want to drive new thinking, it's going to really help you. But it can also help you evolve your thinking as well. So it works at both ends of that revolve and evolve spectrum.
Yes. And should we say the price you get is that you can save time and add speed.
Correct.
That's really good. Very good. Let me ask you now to make some comment on the same area here, David.
Sure, Patrick. Yes, it will be very short.
Yes,
no problem. It will be very short. I think the question that you ask is really, really interesting, Peter. And I think this question really makes a lot of sense for large corporations. For the startups that I'm working with, there is no front end and back end. There is just one struggle to survive and succeed and grow as fast as possible. So their design thinking kind of processes are leading the startups to innovate fast, pivot here and there, and eventually succeed. When it comes to large organization, they are so set that we need to provide them with a stimulus. So we need to have some innovation like total quality management, design thinking that spices the activity or stimulates them to innovate again. And for them, I think it's very much a question of how to at the front end stimulate this. And not many have yet picked up on the great opportunity that design thinking allows also for getting things into markets quicker. Basically, designing together with customers who are in the market is something that the tech giants, Google, Amazon, are doing all the time. They're all the time inventing and innovating the ways they interact with numerous users by testing their experiments the right way.
It's very interesting what you're saying. And again, speed and success probably has a lot to do with this, as we already heard from all of you, in fact. I like to say three things now. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. That's the fourth thing, but that's okay. That's the reality. It's been very, very good what you have been saying. So let me say three things. First of all, thank you very much, all four of you, for truly insightful things. This has been an eye-opener to many of us, including myself. And that brings me to the second point. I want to go to IMD and take at least one course. One is leading digital business transformation. I want to take that course.
You're welcome, Peter.
And the other one is driving strategic innovation. I guess that's you, Patrick. And you will see me there if you will allow me. And
wonderful.
Thank you. And because it is becoming very clear to us, and a new design thinker such as me, that there's a lot to learn here, and a long way for old hats like me to go before I'm up to speed. And the final thing I want to say is to all of you who have been listening in, have been participating in this web discussion. Obviously, I have not been able to see your faces in person because there's been so many of you that is technically impossible to portray you all on the screen. But you have been listening in, and I want to thank you for participating. What will happen now is that you will get a short write-up from IMD as to the core of the substance of what has been said, and each of you should raise questions that you have to each of us. We will then make sure that these are being answered. We would have liked to do that face-to-face, but time didn't allow us to do that. But that is up to you. Put something down on paper, get it into us, and we will respond. And a final thing is that IMD will also let you know what are the various courses we are talking about. I mentioned two, but they have a whole slew of courses that could be relevant for this. So they will give you dates and blah, blah, blah. But I hope that at least some of you will come to those two courses I mentioned. I look forward to meeting you there so we can discuss this face to face. So again, thank you very much, all of you, both the panelists and the participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.